All right, now we're going to go into physical hazards and controls and see what that's about. This is the last hazard. We covered micro already, just did chemicals, and heading into physical hazards, which is one of the most common ones. So you probably have more knowledge around this, but hopefully you still take away something from understanding the hazards and controls associated with them. So physical hazards, you got foodborne injuries caused by physical hazards usually involve relatively few consumers. And the reason why is, well, we'll talk about it. So typically, the result is in personal injuries such as a broken tooth, lacerations, mouth, or choking. So you got food safety versus aesthetics, right? So what looks good versus what is good or what is bad, actually bad for you. Um, sometimes we mix those two. You got physical hazards that definitely will pose an issue, like a you know um, big rock, or not a big rock, big enough rock that you can put in your mouth, but uh, small enough you can put in your mouth, big enough that you can choke off of it, right? And so, potential physical hazards are foreign objects or extraneous material capable of causing injury. That includes glass, metal, and rocks. There's a bunch of others, but we just didn't talk about it right now. Plastics, stuff like that. Aesthetic contaminants that don't cause injury include insects, hair, and sand. And while it may be nasty to ingest an insect or a piece of hair or sand, they don't necessarily pose a food safety risk. Just not a great experience. So regulatory has a guidance around the size of the physical hazard and what they consider to be hazardous. So it's 7 to 25 millimeters in length considered a hazard for the general public. If it's less than 7 millimeters, it may present a hazard. If product is intended for a special group, which includes infants and elderly, but not all the time. So 7 to 25 millimeters, that is the piece extreme, right? That's when you need to put the exclamation point on what you're doing and how you're going to manage that risk, because now you're talking real. You're talking, once again, small enough that you can't necessarily see it, small but big enough that you can choke on it. All right, so the USDA guidelines and FSIS guidelines provides a directive and on inspectors on foreign materials. No specific size guidance for physical hazards for FSIS, but there's a lot of you know attention that goes around physical hazards and their size, because of its ability to directly impact our consumers. So, proper definition for physical hazard is a contaminant in a product represents uh, it represents a physical hazard if it will result in injury to the consumer. Usually, sharp objects between 7 to 25 millimeters. Some sources include contaminated raw materials, poorly designed or maintained facilities and equipment, faulty procedures during production, improper employee practices, and certain processes and operations, including metal to metal contact, like grinding and stuff like that. There's so much metal that is present when you're producing product that eventually you're gonna run into some kind of metal to metal contact. Hopefully not grinding and stuff like that. You've got glass filling operations as well, that pose its own or their own physical hazards or risks. Um, got to treat everyone differently, but also have that knowledge around, what are the overarching risks? How can I make this problem a local problem and not, spread it around? And so you got to get your footprint around it. Um, but yeah, these are the possible sources of most physical hazards. So how do we manage or minimize the hazards? You got material specifications, you got letters of guarantee, you have the vendor inspection and certification, and then periodic product inspection. So throughout production, you got to make sure you're looking at the product and saying to yourself, is this good? Yep, it's good. Because every now and then you will find something. So to minimize physical hazards in the facility, you have to bring attention to the GMPs, ensuring that the facility is not a source of physical hazards themselves, right? So that includes protecting the light fixtures, and not even protected light fixtures, but making sure that the light fixture covers aren't damaged, right? Appropriately designed equipment and adequate maintenance programs. So when it comes to minimizing physical hazards, you got also employee practices. So making sure that employees are adhering to the GMPs, that includes the type of clothes they wear, all the way to the jewelry. You know, some people like to wear, you know, their engagement ring or their marriage ring, right? So they need to make sure that, you know, there's no stones falling out in the product while you're working, no pins in the outer pockets, you know, stuff like that. Making sure that, you know, all employees are trained on, you know, the potential physical hazards that are inherent in the products that are run. Controlling the maintenance work, inspecting areas for loose hardware, tools, inspecting lines prior to restarting operations, and reconciling tools and parts inventory. I want to talk about this last one. I mean, the one before the last. So the cleaning and inspecting lines prior to restarting operations. That was, you know, a big one for me because it kind of stuck out. Quite a few experiences that I've had where you had maintenance come in on the weekend. They had to do some work on a line, and they get up and they leave because in their mind they're thinking, well, I completed my work, I did what I was supposed to do. And, you know, operations employee comes in and they say, well, you know, maintenance did their work, I'm sure they cleaned up. And then you got shavings inside the product line. You know, you get kickouts as soon as you start up, and now you got to throw away product to start your week off because the maintenance didn't do their part in holding themselves accountable and making sure that, you know, at least at a minimum, if they don't want to clean the line, that at least it was tagged or flagged in a way that operations knows, the employee knows that, you know, this thing has to get cleaned before we start back up. And then the employee didn't walk the line and inspect it properly to say, yep, I don't know who did the work, but somebody did some work because I see some shavings inside the product line. You know, it's accountability on both parts, but understanding most importantly what the system calls for, what is your flow, how are we going to address those kind of issues. That is uber important, and that is what the HACCP team is about. That is what the HACCP program is about. It explains and answers those kind of questions when there's doubt. When it comes to minimizing physical hazards during processing, you have control measures for glass, which is a glass breakage program. You know, you don't want to use any old sweep or mop or vacuum or, you know, anything like that when you are cleaning up glass. Control measures for metal, you got magnets, metal detectors, and X-ray. You got control measures for hard and sharp objects, which include screens and filters throughout the entire system. So there's a lot of different things that we do to minimize physical hazards in the production. So the types of equipment used to detect or remove foreign material, you got magnets and metal detectors, screens and sifters, as we talk about. You also have aspirators and flumes. You've got bottles and can cleaners, and then you got X-ray equipment. So if the hazard, we'll talk, I think it's a series of these. We got the hazard and the control. So the hazard is you got glass from light fixtures. Well, the control is shatterproof bulbs and shields. And I also include inspections of some sort, like, you know, on a set frequency. You also, so next item, you got metal fragments from equipment. You've got preventive maintenance, metal detector, and magnets to control these hazards. Oh, I thought I had more examples. If you got any more questions when it comes to this kind of stuff, feel free to ask me. Once again, this marks the end of the hazards, and then we're going to kind of go into a little bit more about the hazards and the control of those. But any questions about any hazards, micro, biological, the chemical, or the physical hazards we got here? Yeah. Okay. All right. Chapter review. Match the methods of minimizing physical hazards below in their appropriate category. And I'll give you some time for that. All right. So we've got control measures for metal is processing appropriately designed equipment is facility. Employee training is employee practices. Control measures for glass, that's in processing. Adherence to GMPs, employee practices. And then lastly, properly protected light fixtures goes to facility.